Hey, sheepdogs. So, on my way to church to get fed this morning. Has been a whirlwind few weeks. But on the topic of church safety, I had some stuff on my mind that I wanted to talk about. Things that I feel like could bless you, maybe in a way that can help you in an emergency. So, we're specifically talking in this video about medical emergencies. Something they hammered into us, and I mean hammered into us in the academy, was allergies. That what are they allergic to? And I don't mean like necessarily bee pollen, or something like that. They're, goldenrod. I mean medications that you're allergic to. And that is something that we had a paramedic tell us that they have had. He was one of our instructors in the academy. That they have had several times where they've given somebody something, a medication, in the ambulance, not realizing that unconscious patient that they can't talk to is allergic to it, and then they have to undo what they did to help them that was now doing harm, and then reverse that enough to actually do something different, which is even more of a shock to that person's system. And so he definitely beat us over the head with that. And I've used that several times, when I'm out with my departments. And so there's two thoughts about this that I want to go with. Number one is, so you've had an emergency, a medical emergency at your church, and that's overwhelmingly what you're going to deal with. Fires are very few and far between, and thank God active shooters, active killers coming into our church bodies in the United States is a very rare occurrence. And so thank God for that. But let's say that you've got somebody, they've collapsed, or they're not feeling well, and you've got an ambulance coming. One of the things that you can do, because law enforcement is going to come to secure the scene and make sure that it's safe, and so that's going to be a thing. And then the second part of that is going to be the fact that between law enforcement arriving and securing the scene, either the officers are going to try to ask questions of, potentially, they may not, the patient, or the paramedics will. And I have literally been to scenes where the patient was asked the same set of questions 3 different times, which is fine. It's fine, but and sometimes I think they do that for testing purposes, cognitive responses. But if you've got those details already, you can actually save time. So one of them, if you can get the person's name and age, and it's a great thing, especially with a juvenile, I have found, to say, hey, this can actually speed the process along once the ambulance arrives. So, your child's name is Timothy, his last name is Smith, whatever, date of birth. And as you're getting those details, the thing that they care about more than anything is, what are they allergic to? Are they allergic to aspirin? Or are they allergic to codeine? Are they allergic to morphine? Anything like that. And once you have those details on a little slip of paper, not only did you help, and I've talked about this before, but you helped mom or dad or their guardian to have something to do in that moment, but you've also got useful details. And I don't know how many times I've had a paramedic look over, and they're busy, look over and nod once their thanks and take it, because that's useful information. And I've even had them read through it and go, oh, you're allergic to this, and look at me and nod once, like, good catch, because that was something that they might have given them. So that is a huge detail. And the more clear and concise the communication can be to dispatch, so somebody who's not super excitable. There was a young man I was working with the other evening that had gotten himself in some trouble, and he needed a good dad talk. He was right at the age that it could have landed him with a permanent record and maybe even some jail time. And thankfully, the person, for his sake, the person that he had done these things toward, didn't want to press charges. They just wanted him to stop. And so we had a really good dad talk with this young man, and maybe we reached him. But I had to invite this young man to breathe more calmly, and I didn't tell him to calm down. That never helps anyone. But I said, hey, it's easy in a moment like this. You got a lot of adrenaline pumping. You've never been in an environment like this before. You've never had anything like this happen before. And I said, I promise it'll help. Breathe in through the nose, hold it for several seconds, and exhale, and you get more oxygen to the brain. I promise it'll help. And it did. He calmed visibly, and his responses calmed. in that moment. Somebody who's not super excitable is going to be really, really good to have on the phone. Another part of that is when your adrenaline is pumping hard and you catch yourself, you'll think that you're saying the address to your church. You know, you'll think you're saying 1, 2, 3, 4 Freedom Street, you know, your town, USA, but you're actually going 1, 2, 3, 4. You're talking so fast. I've had people give me their date of birth so fast that I cannot understand it. I've had people give me their social so fast I can't understand it, and then they get indignant when you ask them a third time to clarify. And I try to, in those moments, to say, hey, I understand that you got a lot going on right now. Can you take a good breath for me? And then visibly in that moment, they are much, much calmer, and then they can communicate. If you've got somebody on the phone that can communicate clearly, that's huge. And so getting the allergies, a big thing. I've talked about this before as well. Huge, critical, mission critical in that moment, if at all possible, because the patient could become unconscious and not able to relay this information. Not having someone's medical history is a big deal at the hospital if they don't have those medical records already, which is frequent. So that's a thing. Secondly, how it's conveyed over the phone can be enormous. So myself and another officer responded to an explosion out in the countryside late at night, and someone was burning brush. And I think because I'm not an expert, but I'm fairly certain that a very volatile fuel-based accelerant was used, and probably because of the air pressure that was there that night, it held all of it down because it blew up, and the person still had their eyebrows and didn't seem to be injured, but they were using something that they really shouldn't have been using to start a fire. There's much safer ways to start fires, and so we responded running code, because the funny part was there had been a meth lab in that area several years ago. We don't really have very many meth labs left. Most of them are in Mexico now, and they don't really make that much methamphetamine domestically anymore. It's almost all coming out of Mexico and done in like factory type environments. But anyway, so we run code to this, and we're getting very few details. The person that called it in, saw an explosion across the street. There's multiple areas of fire. That's really all they can relay. And so dispatch has us on the way. We were actually running mutual aid for county, because the county units were at the other end of the county. And they're like, yep, go. So we get there, and dispatch is asking us if the scene is secure. Well, we don't know, because we're going into this environment. The reason I share this is, now imagine this coming back to your church. So we don't know what we're running into. So are we running into a meth lab that exploded? Are we running into somebody who blew something up on purpose and might be dangerous, might be willing to swap lead at a high speed? Are we running into where a meth lab did explode? A lot of those folks are armed and very dangerous. Are we going to an environment that there are multiple casualties on the ground that are bleeding and badly burned? And we're discussing this on the way and praying. The officer I was with is a believer, and we're praying for safety, and we're having to discuss emergency triage. Like, as we get there, how many more ambulances are we going to need? And we've got to be able to park in a way that doesn't congest. It's a 2-lane rural road, and that environment is not conducive to stacks of emergency vehicles and being able to get the ambulances in. So we're discussing all these things. And so I had a loaded rifle next to my leg, ready to go, chambered, safety on. I've got a medical bag at my feet. I've got hard armor at my feet, and we're praying that it's nothing. That's what's going through officers' minds on the way to your church when they're getting unclear details. And mind you, we're literally playing telephone. So if I call in and talk to a dispatcher and I'm relaying medical history, I may miss something, or I'm relaying details, I may miss something that I'm then giving to dispatch, which then the dispatcher is at high speed trying to dispatch, law enforcement, fire, and EMS out to the scene, and they're missing details. And I've had that happen before. I've talked about it before, but it's a very real thing. And so we weren't really getting good details that we needed about what the scene was. And of course, it's late at night and it's dark out. So we get there, and within about 2 minutes, we understood as fire and EMS are coming, they're having to stage. They can't come in. Staging meaning they can't finish the trip. They've got to stop a certain distance away, and they have to wait for the okay, the all clear to come in. So we make contact with the person who had lit the fire, and they were lawfully burning, but probably had used an accelerant they shouldn't have been using. And so we were able to give the all clear, and actually, because there were no injuries, we were able to downgrade fire so they weren't running code, and able to cancel and what we call disregard EMS, which a lot of them are the same people, but the ambulance turned around and went back. And so that frees them up to go to a more critical thing, perhaps somewhere else. And so now imagine this with your church. You've got a situation where you've got a medical, fire, or whatever incident going on, and they have to secure the scene first. Or if you're able to give details and have those details ready quickly, if they're like, how many people, you've had something happen in the parking lot and somebody got run over, how many people are injured? And one. But I will tell you, kind of keep an eye on the crowd, because I've actually seen situations where other people have had heart attacks and collapsed. And so if you notice somebody else that seems to be in bad shape, you might indicate, it looks like we have a second potential patient. Can you get another ambulance here? And there was an incident in my area years ago where a train exploded, and a man died the next day of a heart attack, probably from stress related to it. There was massive damage to the city from a train explosion, and took probably the better part of a year to fix all the damage. And that's a thing that can happen at the scene, is you can have secondary situations. Another thing is, and this is something that you'll hear a lot of really high-speed guys talking about, and I mentioned this in another video the other day, is being able to clearly articulate where the situation is and having somebody go out. I have frequently gone out at medical events and flagged EMS. The other night, as fire was coming in, I pulled out my flashlight and I hit the epileptic seizure mode, as I call it. I hit the strobe on my flashlight, because that'll about pop your eyeballs, and I just pointed it at the ground, and I painted the ground what I call a light puddle, and I put this pulsing light puddle at my feet, and I immediately saw the brake lights coming on. The fire was out in the timber enough that it was hard to see from the road. We actually almost passed it with two people looking, and so I immediately saw brake lights coming on, because they recognized where I was standing. They recognized that signal. In an environment like that at night, being able to shine a flashlight at your feet or something like that, or lasso it in the air, something can get attention and help to draw the right people to the scene. Being able to indicate and bring them to the right door. And a lot of it's just going to come down to, they're probably not going to be able to stop and talk to you. So as they're coming in, if you just get their attention and then you point over and indicate where they're to go, you're going to get a nod and they're going to go. Because there's nothing worse than doing laps around a complex looking for, and you have that sense of urgency, and you know something bad is wrong. So that's a thing. Also, being able to, so you can indicate where it is, and then being able to clear an area around the immediate vicinity to get them in. People want to gather and throng and flock, and a lot of times in churches I've found they don't really want to record it. It's out more in the public that they want to record it. I think the church crowd, especially on church campus, is more respectful a lot of times, even at a subconscious level. But being able to clear an area around it and understand that the first unit on scene is going to be law enforcement typically. The second vehicle on scene is probably going to be a fire truck, and at least in my area, and then third, fourth, fifth is likely to be an ambulance, and you've got to have room for them to move. So if it's something that maybe there's a vehicle right next to it, and you know the owner, and they're able to move it safely minutes before that. Maybe not. Sometimes the confines are very tight. Somebody goes out to their vehicle, they're not feeling well. You go out there with them, and as they sit down in their vehicle, they code. They go, they pass out. They go into a diabetic episode, seizure, heart attack, whatever. There may not be a lot of room between those vehicles, and paramedics are used to that. I mean, I've seen paramedics working in vehicles that are upside down or on their side in the roadway, and they're having to step over things and try to get enough traction on window glass, so they're used to some of that. But if you can make sure there's enough room around it, many times at the scene of things where somebody fell off a ladder or something like that, I'll be like, okay, let's move the ladder back, let's move this awning that you're working on back, true story happened, let's move this vehicle if we can, and then create this space around it. Final thought is, it's an old Bruce Lee thing, but he would say be as water. And I've really thought about that a lot when it comes to church safety, when it comes to doing the law enforcement thing. For years, as a very hands-on chaplain, I would look around and I would see where the need was. I remember an event doing church security, church safety for a church, and it was a 4th of July celebration. We were dealing with a man who was intoxicated, and the gentleman, as we were approaching the vehicle and I was gathering off-duty law enforcement and we were getting on-duty law enforcement there, he was given, an option, which was you can let your spouse drive you home, or you can go to jail for DWI. And he chose to let his spouse drive him home. The guy was quite volatile, but once he saw uniformed law enforcement there, he simmered quite quickly. But as it went from church safety predominantly to law enforcement predominantly, I started taking a step back and turned to a lady, hey, you might want to take a step back, you might want to move your daughter back, this guy may be about to get arrested. And as you're doing that and moving that back, I shut down the traffic that was coming in to the parking lot on that aisle to keep more people away from him. At that point, we didn't know if he had any weapons on him, and he was trying to get in his vehicle, and there was actually an off-duty officer that was blocking his ingress to his vehicle. And so that's a thing. As you're doing that and you're trying to keep those pieces moving around you, it's helping to, because we actually had law enforcement come in on one of the biggest nights that we'd ever had at that church, and as they were coming into the parking lot, they actually had the full right-of-way and there was no traffic impeding their access to that. I'm going to wave at one of my parking guys. And but anyway, just a few thoughts about that as you're dealing with situations, and I'm seeing it more and more from the opposite side of the badge now. I've spent a lot of time beside the badge, and I'm seeing a lot of things that I've seen some really, really good first responders, and I've seen some really, really good church security, and some folks that under stress just handle situations really, really well. And then occasionally you end up with situations where people are so panicked, you're not really sure, they're not really thinking in the moment. So as always, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May his face shine upon you. Remember to keep that powder dry. Keep yourself and your equipment in good shape. God bless.